We sing in favour of something new. We love comparing the old and new, to tell the tale of a brave time, Lord. We'll keep on coming back till you're bored. There is no glory greater than the download of a podcast fan. No Patreon on earth for we, just a perpetual hosting fee.
Welcome to the podcast where we take something old, a Doctor Who story from the original series, compare it with something new, one from the new series, and add something borrowed to make Something Who. Hello, I'm Richard, and we're back with Something Who podcast for our landmark episode number 100. With it being episode 100, we thought, we don't want to wallow too much in it. Look, in the end, it's just a few conversations that we've had with ourselves that we humour ourselves with, thinking maybe a few other people have been listening too. But we thought we'd just sort of run through some of the things we remember from recording 100 episodes, which won't last very long, just because at least we feel we should mark the occasion. So look, I would never have made a podcast if it hadn't been for the Omnirumour. That's what I blame, because I was a lone Doctor Who fan, quietly enjoying this show on my own for about 40 years, when I suddenly became so obsessed with missing episodes that I started joining forums and interacting with other fans.
Well, I was going to say I had nothing to contribute to memories of the last 100 podcasts, but I do remember the bloody Omnirumour, so thanks for dredging that up.
Yeah.
But, the Omnirumour's dead to me. I gave the best years of my life to that rumour, and how did it repay me? 9 measly episodes of Doctor Who and some Basil Brush. No. I don't think about that sort of thing anymore.
Best not.
No. Absolutely. So, Paul and Giles, I guess I met you on Gallifrey Base, and then we were sort of in a private forum, and finally in real life. And after I'd had a sort of initial go out on the Grumpcast podcast, I thought I would like to set something up of my own. And so the three of us plus Simon started a podcast called 13cast, talking about the adventures of the 13th Doctor.
Yeah. Did it ever get to 13 episodes? Just out of interest. No, okay. But out of little acorns.
Yeah. It didn't even make 10. So we've
13 cast had to die so that Something Who could live, and it did.
Yes.
Over and over again.
Yeah, and the fault was with Giles, because Giles came up with the format.
Yeah, blame me.
It is a wonderful format. It's so simple, it's brilliant.
Well, it's a
bit like some of the podcasters.
Yeah, well, we had to find something to do in the off period once the first series of Jodie was over, didn't we?
Yeah.
I think that was the thing. It was just like, okay, what are we going to do for the next year before they give us another few episodes to discuss? We were quite keen to keep on going, so it seemed like, okay, what can we come up with that would be a good format, good excuse for keeping on having discussions and like mixing and matching. It seems to throws up interesting comparisons and brings out things. That's kind of just also a bit of an excuse for a randomizer kind of effect. We end up watching stuff that we probably wouldn't normally pick off the shelf. Yeah, today being a case in point when we come on to that. But I think mostly I remember the songs. Shudder. No, we've had some interesting discussions over the years and some interesting guests. Tonight being no exception.
Now you see,
well, from a listener's perspective, and that's principally what I've been for all the years you've been doing it. It was during lockdown. I just needed to have a friendly conversation I could earwig in, and
something who did that. It sounded like 3, 4, whoever you had on. It was just a conversation on a picnic table in a beer garden next to me that was more interesting than the one I was having, and it was just great. I use it to this day. The last one around the giggle. I use it when I'm walking the moors and what other people must think when I'm ranting on about in disagreement for something somebody said. I don't know, but it's the perfect walking companion, and it has been since lockdown. So I guess on behalf of those listeners that are stuck with the podcast as long as I have, thank you, because it's been great fun.
Well, thanks.
Yeah. It does make it seem worthwhile.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
I mean, I feel like similarly, I suppose. So two things happen as a result of running this podcast. Well, three things. I might come to the third. The two things really are, number one, that every month or so, I actually sit down and watch Doctor Who. And I think, as you all know by now, it's not a thing that I tend to do naturally these days. So it's nice. That's a nice thing that I sit down and watch some stories and enjoy them mostly. And the second thing is that we have a conversation together, as you were saying, Rick. And I don't think we would have a conversation if it wasn't for the podcast. I don't think that I would call you up and say, I tell you what, let's just sit down and have a chat about stuff.
No, you're like that, aren't you? Really?
So it gives us an excuse, a reason to start chatting, and the basis for the discussion as it starts out is Doctor Who, and then we run through a bunch of other things that we talk about along the way. So I think it's good from that point of view. I mean, the third thing is then I've got to edit the bloody thing, but I mean that's just one of those things, and if it wasn't for my fastidiousness, it probably wouldn't take me nearly as long. But anyway, there we go.
I wish I had watched the DVD because I don't think this is just me or my internet connection, but the version I play looks shocking.
Oh, it is shocking.
It
Yeah,
was low
absolutely
resolution.
awful.
Literally, I mean, not just a bad. It's low res. Like
it's about half the resolution, wasn't it? Or something?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's a bit poor. Okay, good.
Yeah.
I mean, good. Glad it's not just me. Bad on every other score.
Yeah, iPlayer has certainly curated a mixed bag of versions of episodes.
Yeah.
I mean, I could have been convinced it was one of those, what do we call them? On the black and whites where they're filming it and they only get half the resolution.
Yes, Daleks Part 7 or
It's
something
not
like that.
Stored Field, it's the other one.
Yes,
Suppressed
or an
Field.
Suppressed
NTSC.
Field.
Yeah.
You've been out of the Omni game too long.
Yeah. Yeah, so this was a suppressed field version of Stones of Blood, I guess.
I love it. I what a great joke. Joke for a tiny handful of people who are all the people that matter in the world.
It's a shame it took me 3 minutes to get there. Under the Lake Before the Flood.
I liked the setting. I like abandoned villages.
Right.
I have a great collection of them personally, and what I like about them, there are various different types of abandoned village, and this incorporates elements from two of my favourite types of abandoned village. There's the village which is acquired by the military, like is it Tyneham or so, on the south coast?
Yeah.
And uses a training ground and becomes a spooky semi-derelict place through decades of misuse. There's the village which is lost to the creation of a reservoir. Plenty of those.
Yeah.
Little church steeples poking out at low tide in the reservoirs. And we have a bit of... This is neither of those, but also both of them.
Yes.
So clearly that's an inspiration. I think, good old Toby is a fellow abandoned village fan. The third type, for those who are still wondering, of abandoned village is the plague village, which disappeared in the late 1300s.
Yeah.
This doesn't incorporate that kind, which I can't really blame him for not coming up with three different explanations for where this is set.
Okay, well, look, let's kick off then with The Celestial Toymaker, which was written by Brian Hales and I guess Donald Tosh and Jerry Davis and perhaps one or two others, and directed by Bill Sellers of All Creatures Great and Small and Triangle fame. I mean, all of that was still to come when he did this. Broadcast in April 1966, I mean, you know what I normally say, which is that I, watched it on original broadcast. Well, that was about 18 months before I was born, so that wasn't going to happen. Actually, the first time I watched it was this week. I mean, obviously, I've seen the extant episode 4. It was on Lost in Time.
Yes.
But aside from that, I've never watched it until this week when I watched the animation. And then I watched the reconstruction as well to give me 2 different perspectives on it. And I'm glad I watched both of them because they gave me very different feelings about the story, which we might get into at some point.
Do we want to talk about the background of this story a little bit?
I think you ought to.
Yeah, please do.
I might be quite well posed at this point. It's at least
Carry
fresh
on,
in
then.
my mind. So Brian Hales wrote 4 episodes that were originally quite dark, quite psychologically orientated, playing on themes of childhood and perhaps family, but they were deemed too dark, and he was asked to go away and rewrite them, which he did. So he delivered a second draft, which probably contained quite a lot of chunks that survived through to the final version. Donald Tosh then did his script writing duties, and he latched on to a couple of characters that Hales had written that were an aunt and uncle that befriended Stephen and Dodo, and then they get steadily more creepy as the story goes on. And they were named after a pair of characters called George and Margaret, who were the subject of a play by a playwright called Gerald Savary, although they don't actually appear in the play. It's like a Waiting for Godot kind of situation. It seems that Donald Tosh tried to punch up the dialogue a little bit and take the George and Margaret characters, steer the story a little bit more towards witty banter perhaps, and then Donald Tosh went on holiday and Jerry Davis took over, and he allegedly, on the instruction of Gerald Savary, removed George and Margaret. So it's generally said that in their place Jerry Davis put half a dozen new characters. We know that's definitely true of the clowns. The clowns were not in the original draft or the rewrite, but we also have the pairs of characters that are Rug and Wiggs and the King and Queen of Hearts. Now, it's generally thought that they were new additions by Jerry Davis, but in my recent YouTube video, I posed the question, and I still pose this to all of us here tonight. If those 4 characters were not in the original, who was? Who did George and Margaret and Steve and Dodo meet along the way if those characters were all new by Jerry Davis? So it's my suspicion that those characters, in some form, maybe only as small parts, were originally in it. And there is some evidence in the script, in this palimpsest of a document, that they might have been in it before Jerry Davis got his hands on it. So you got 3 authors who each wrote chunks, and Donald Tosh's chunks were pretty much deleted by Jerry Davis. So the final version is really Brian Hales and Jerry Davis's script, but Donald Tosh takes a lot of credit, and that may be because
That's not like him at all.
maybe because that's in his nature, but it may also be the case that he told Brian Hales what to put in his first draft. We will never know. But Donald Tosh has sometimes taken credit for things and sometimes not. So that, to me, suggests that he can't quite remember.
Ooh, look at this.
What?
I've started to discover this box is actually full of Target books.
You didn't know?
No? Terror of the Autons?
Oh yeah, I had that one.
Claws of Axos, eh? Golly.
Oh, I didn't have that one. You've got a mixture of old and new.
Yeah. Well, this one is an ex-library one. I think that is withdrawn from Leeds Grammar School Library.
Yeah. By you.
I mean, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, withdrawn under your jumper.
Whereas this one is 50p. So I definitely bought that in the 70s.
Oh, they were That's before my time, the 50p
Published
days.
in 1977 by Wyndham Publications Limited. So it says. And it's in the days when they were still sort of telling you all the books they'd already published. So Bloke's not really
Does it say the changing face of Doctor Who?
Yes, it does. The cover illustration portrays the third Doctor Who. So there we go. Yeah. The new version of Terran. Oh, somebody in Leeds Grammar School has been ticking off the Doctor Who books that they've got. They've definitely got the 10th Planet. Oh, and they've also got the Deadly Assassin, which wasn't in the list, but they've added it to there just to be clear. Yeah. Oh well, that's a nice find. I shall have to rummage through that and see what else I've got. And joining us for the first time is Rick, who posts on social media as Brick Pandorica and produces fantastic Lego models of Doctor Who scenes, and has been a long-time supporter of the podcast. So, hello, Good evening.
Good evening, everybody. It is fantastic to be with you tonight. Looking forward to it all.
Excellent. Well, look, I mean, it's not that long ago since some of us got together last, but in the meantime, we've had the Christmas episode. And then, rather uncannily like the 2005 reboot, no sooner did we meet a new character, Ruby Sunday, played by the fantastic Millie Gibson, than we hear stories about her departure. Did anyone have anything particular they wanted to say about the Christmas episode?
4 for 4. I thought it was terrific.
Yeah.
Good.
That's a bleak reference to the fact that it's 4 new episodes since Russell came back. Sorry if it made sense in my head.
Yes.
As so many things do.
I really enjoyed it. It was good family fare. We sat down on Boxing Day morning, sunk in the sofa, and it was a really good pickup. I thought 15th Doctor, full of energy, just sparkled out of the screen, made me have a Doctor I wanted to cheer for right from the off, and out of the shadow of Tennant, which he was for much of the giggle. I thought he was absolutely the centre of the show. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, no complaints on my behalf. There seems to be a strange subset of fandom complaining about it having turned to fantasy rather than science fiction.
Yeah.
No worries on my side at all. I thought they were both our new regulars are fantastic. I thought there was some lovely moments there. Very reminiscent of the TV movie, that scene with the policeman. Which I think, was that the one they'd slotted in?
It was, yeah.
Was that the one they slotted in quite late?
Yeah.
Yes, when
apparently in response to a Disney
gave their
note or
notes.
something.
Because, I mean, it was very reminiscent of the episode of Rose, wasn't it? It took lots of little cues and moments, and but showed how much further you can push it.
Him
when it's
fitting
on
in and
Celebrant for 18 years later or whatever it is. Yes, Russell tried to keep the Doctor off screen as long as he did first time round with Eccleston, and Disney lost their nerve. But I don't think it mattered.
No, well, I thought that was a lovely little scene. Quite nice character establishment there. So even if he did it through empathy rather than McGann's curious habit of knowing the future lives of everyone in San Francisco in 1999.
I even forgave the episode, the musical number, which I suspect for some fans as old as me was the one that was going to provoke. But it just was full of, I think Christmas episodes get a sense of latitude, certainly from myself when I'm watching it, and a musical number, the fantasy element with the goblins. I can forgive even the intelligent gloves. I can forgive on a Boxing Day morning. So it did nothing to take the shine off what was a spectacular episode.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I guess it was so much fun a lot of the time that I wasn't too worried about anything else. I mean, the only thing I'd say that has slightly got my goat about the whole RTD reboot is this Mavity thing, and honestly, it's just the twin worlds of linguistics and science have kind of hit in my brain, and I find it slightly frustrating because, I mean, essentially there was a word for gravity already pre-Newton, I mean, if nothing else, it meant seriousness. But and of course, Newton didn't invent gravity. I mean, the ancients knew about it. It's just that he developed a way of expressing, I suppose, slightly more accurately how it all worked. So yeah, it's a little bit annoying. But again, if the payoff is good enough in a few stories' time, then I'll get the Grinch back inside.
Yeah, I did wonder about that. I mean, at first I was willing to give it a pass and couldn't work out why everyone's... I know I was more bothered on a linguistic level than on a history of science level, because basically at the moment you've got Newton sitting under an apple tree and an apple falling on his head. You're in fantasy land anyway.
Yeah.
But I was more bothered by the linguistic thing than anything. And all these people started saying, well, it's going to be an arc, or like expecting there to be a payoff. And I was thinking, wasn't it just a stupid joke? And then, lo and behold, they appear to be running with it. So now maybe it's Bad Wolf. Maybe it's this season's Bad Wolf. We're going to meet Mavity in episode 8. Yeah.
It's lovely that we can overthink these things, isn't it? I came away from the Star Beast thinking, how did they find so many houses in London in a row that hadn't converted their lofts? That was lucky.
Okay, so Image of the Fendal, written by Chris Boucher and directed by George Spenton Foster.
I know I watched this the first time round because, unlike certain stories that season which I don't have a strong memory of, I do have a vivid memory of this, and particularly the cliffhanger to episode 2, rather randomly.
All right.
But to explain that, I can tell you, I may have mentioned this before, I had a strange, ghastly fascination with skulls as a child. Not in real life, mostly in the media. I was entranced by the title to Scooby-Doo, which featured 2 skulls in quick succession. And this was the other skull that featured heavily in my childhood, even though I only saw it once. So I remember that cliffhanger. Years later, when I read the book and thought, oh, that's where it came from. I remember the Doctor offering the skull, the Jelly Baby. In my head, there was that separation between the moment where he offers the Jelly Baby, does a bit of business, and then is drawn in to touch it. It's when he gives it the Jelly Baby that he gets taken over by its power. But I think it was the combination of the skull and seeing Doctor Who screaming in anguish that seared that into my, I gather, 6-year-old, just turned 6-year-old memory. So there you go. The rest of it, no. Just that bit.
It's a good age.
I was delighted to discover that it has a context, that scene, and there is actually a story that goes with it. I now want a toy Fenderline, but I discovered that they released one a few years ago and it costs about 100 quid on eBay, so I'll just have to carry on dreaming.
You can knit one, maybe.
You can edit this out because it's very visual, but for your eyes only, in an attempt to publicise this for whenever it comes out.
Splendid.
So that will accompany Richard whenever you're ready to release this.
Splendid.
Yeah, that's marvellous.
Yeah. I've been a fan of Lego since probably about 1970. So yeah, that's another way you're on my wavelength there.
Fair enough.
Well, you say you're a fan. You haven't actually built any of the sets since transmission.
There is that. Yeah. I did.
Sorry,
I did most of my best work in the early 70s. I suppose probably. You left our listeners on a cliffhanger last time. So how did your exhibition go of the Lego models?
Yeah, went to the Calder Valley Brick Show, no less, and showed off some of my Lego models to the general public, and it was brilliant. Brilliant to see kids who have a real big knowledge of Doctor Who, not just the recent episodes, but could recognise models from the 60s and 70s, and lovely to pick adults who were doing their best to pretend they didn't know what they were looking at amongst the Doctor Who models. So I'm going to do it again. I'm going to the York Racecourse in the middle weekend in April to do the same again.
Excellent. You heard it here first.
Fantastic. And finally, and this has been a long time in the making, Our guest on this episode is the extraordinary, exuberant jazz pianist, convention enlivener, and sometime BFI attendee. It's Jess Jurkovic.
Hello there from the other side of the pond.
Yeah, it's nice to have something of an international flavour. We have been accused occasionally of being four posh Guardian readers who sort of talk over earnestly about Doctor Who. So anyway, I mean, we've got somebody who doesn't sound posh anyway. That's good.
Thank you so much.
I think. Yeah, actually, I don't sound posh, and I don't think any of us really do. But anyway, there we go. So hello, Jess. Welcome to Something Who.
Thank you.
You're recently back from Gallifrey 1 in Los Angeles. So how was it?
Brilliant. It's my third time there in a row, I guess I should say, and it's now a sort of addiction. I probably have to go every year because I always have such a good time seeing, old friends and new, and there's such a wonderful mix of guests, splendid guests this year. And for the first time, I actually hosted a panel interviewing 4 composers, including 2 Doctor Who composers, about their work for film and television. I got to interview Sega Nakanola and Dominic Glynn. Ooh. As well as 2 LA-based composers, David Raiklin and George Shaw. It was a fascinating chat, and it was wonderful. It was such an honor to just sit back and listen to them talk.
So look, as a sort of opening gambit, I'll say that I first came across Evil of the Daleks as a listing in the Radio Times 10th anniversary special in the sort of mid-70s and also in the making of Doctor Who. There was a DWM archive feature in the early 80s that intrigued me. At the time, Troughton, Watling and Hines all sort of said, yeah, that was our favourite. I was fortunate then to see episode 2 at the Panopticon convention in London, just after it had been recovered in 1987. And I was absolutely transfixed by it. I mean, that I can't think of an episode. Maybe Enemy episode 1, but Evil 2, the first time I saw that, I just thought, that's incredible. I mean, it was kind of looking into the past, I suppose. I listened to an audio tape in the early 90s, but that was a bit muffled. It came out on CD. It was a bit better. I've read the Target book. I've watched the animation, and finally for this one, I watched the Telesnap reconstruction from the DVD. I find it hard to be dispassionate about Evil, given I've had such a long relationship with it. I've wanted to see it for so long, and there are so many emotions about it. But anyway, I mean, let's open up the discussion, and maybe you can talk, the three of you, about sort of how you came across it.
Well, for me, although I didn't see the original episode until it was released on a VHS tape called Daleks: The Early Years, which I basically wore out. But I did have the Tom Baker narrated audio, which of course excluded the tricolor scenes to get out of the copyright of the recorded music. And then the newer one came out with Fraser Hines narrating. And I adore all of those. And then the recent animation has been just a thrill. And I'm not one of those purists who is mad about the various changes, although we'll talk about some of the music. That's obviously a thing of mine. And so some editing costs some musical cues in the animation, which I was a little sad about, but it's thrilling. All of them are thrilling. And I just really appreciate that story a lot. I have a thing for missing episodes, I guess. And some of those missing stories are favorites, even though they might not be the greatest stories, because of, the memories that I first had when I got to hear them for the first time. They still bring that thrill.
Sure.
Giles?
Well, my first experience was same as Richard. We must have been in the same room
Fantastic.
all those years ago.
Yeah.
Because when it was when you said London, because I was thinking, I think they first wasn't the first recording. It was first screening at Brighton that year before, but I wasn't there for that one. But I was there in '87 at Imperial.
Yeah,
and I was trying to think. I was thinking it must have been I was thinking it had to be a convention screening. You helped me to pin down exactly which one it was. Yeah, I've experienced it in kind of all the ways as well, I guess. Yeah, thanks Jess for reminding me. It was Tom that did the voiceover on the audio version. I never realised it was cut down. I guess that's the thing, unless you're familiar with the story. Haven't ever read the novelisation, I have to say. That's a gap, but I seem to have consumed it in virtually every other way since.
If you're curious about that old audio cassette that Tom Bacon rated, it is on the Blu-ray as a special feature.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Oh, that's right.
On the way on disc 3.
Very good. I must say, before we go on, I am so envious as an American of the immediacy that you have for Doctor Who fandom, and events seem like they're constantly going on, where we get like 2 a year or 3 a year. I mean, I guess I could travel to a lot of different places that have American Doctor Who conventions, but it seems like there's always something going on, which I just envy a lot.
Yeah, I didn't think it would make a big difference to me, but the curation of Doctor Who material on iPlayer, as it, if I thought an obsession could go up a notch, it has with iPlayer. Turning to evil this time round, I was just watching it everywhere. I watched it on train, watched it in bed, watched it in the living room. You don't need to know the other place I watched it.
Okay.
Interestingly, you know the way that modern streaming services ping you onto the next episode? iPlayer took me episode 1, episode 2 animated, then episode 2, the recovered episode, the original episode, and then into 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Because I did notice when I watched episode 2, I watched episode 1, and then I went and watched I went and found the real version of episode 2, and then I noticed it continued straight on. I was thinking I was going to have to find my way back, but it continued on with the animation of episode 3. I was, quite fittingly, I kind of had a multimedia experience of it this time. I was in the car for a few hours yesterday, driving up and down to my mum's, so I did some of the middle episodes on just on audio, and then watched the telesnaps on the old. I managed to unearth the old Doctor Who photo novels website.
Oh yeah,
on the old legacy version of the Doctor Who site, and then picked up again, sort of from the for the last couple of episodes on animation. So jumped around a bit.
I had the opportunity these last holidays to show my parents the Evil of the Daleks animation. Right. They are Doctor Who fans only to the extent that they will watch it when I'm home. But they do actually like it. They do actually enjoy it. It's a family thing that we end up doing. I guess my dad's into it a little more than my mom, but at the same time, it's a fun thing that we do. And I was impressed because it's a long story, but they were actually quite engaged. And I thought that was a real tribute not only to the story of itself, but the animated production was something that absolutely held their attention and they really enjoyed. So credit to the show.
Yeah. I mean, one good thing that animation does is it kind of it explains some of the stuff that's very difficult to follow either on the telesnap reconstruction or the audio. Clearly, they may not have got absolutely everything right, or it might not be exactly what happened on screen. But it provides you with more visual information that explains it. So, Jess, I mean, I felt when I was watching this that Dudley Simpson explodes into the action straight away. I mean, the first thing that you hear is a lot of music around that kind of those early scenes of the aeroplane and the TARDIS being driven off.
Evil of the Daleks is definitely a turning point in his writing for Doctor Who, because the last few scores, he does 3 scores of season 4, and 2 of them are basically organs, with definitely in one case, him just playing the organ. Suddenly, there's this lush ensemble of flutes and clarinets and English horns and cello and bass and percussion, and then still some radiophonic oscillators for the Dalek music particularly. It's like the first indication of what his eventual mixing of electronica synthesizers and acoustic instruments would sound like, and it's so brilliant in that way. And it gets off to a totally groovy start with that music as they're chasing the TARDIS, but it's so lush, and the documentation of the program as broadcast says that this is the Alec Furman Ensemble, or orchestra rather, and there were 8 musicians, but there's more than 8 instruments, and as usual they had someone, each particular musician might double on different instruments, like the flute would also play alto flute, the clarinet would also play bass clarinet, et cetera, and the percussionist would usually play multiple things.
Yeah.
And significantly, there's separate piano-only tracks, or mostly piano-only, which are very distinctive. And one of the sets of pieces that I transcribed was just this piano music. There's also like a wobbling of the music, so it's been recorded but then treated afterwards to have this kind of wobbling effect that a piano can actually have, and a little bit of oscillator. There's usually like a single tone played at the same time as all this piano music. So it's very strange. And like I say, it's kind of the first steps towards that merging of the two instruments into one orchestra, which just makes it fascinating. And I never tire of listening to this music as well.
Listeners dipped a bit for our last podcast.
Well, there weren't any Daleks in it.
Yeah, perhaps we're not distinctive enough. Remember that review about us sounding like 4 Guardian readers?
How can we make sure listeners can tell us apart?
Oh, I know. We could wear different coloured sashes.
Brilliant. Except we're an audio-only podcast.
Wait a minute. Doesn't one of us sound exactly like David Mitchell?
That's Paul, and he's not in this one.
Okay. Well, look, what we need then are some diverse voices.
Well, oddly enough, I just received an offer from the 3 hosts of the hit podcasts 2 Oods and the Sensorites to join us as guests.
Oh, I've not heard of them. What do you think?
Well, they say they sense we need some help, and they have oodles to say.
Oh, great. Dial them in.
Thank you for allowing us to serve your audience, dudes.
We are thrilled with this opportunity. It's really good.
2 Oods. And I guess you must be a Sensorite.
Not just any Sensorite. When you address one of the elders, you call him Sir.
Anything else would be rude.
You wouldn't want to be booed.
In that case, welcome, sir.
We have successfully infiltrated this podcast and can now proceed with the elimination of its human hosts.
We can hear you, you know.
If you didn't use your telepathic communicator, you should.
That's killed the mood.
Perhaps you should just leave us now?
Damn it! That's the 3rd podcast this week.
And 2 of them sued.
Can we sing our song before we go?
No, we did a musical number last time.
Understood.
We missed him beyond measure, but finally back in our ranks is the multi-talented 3D artist, writer, researcher, podcaster and co-creator of Dalek 63 to 88. It's Gav Rymill.
Hooray! It's me. I'm back.
Yeah.
Lucky people.
Yeah.
Is this podcast going out before the 18th of May?
Well, it depends how good I am at editing, but probably.
Well, Riverside Studios, 18th of May. Three Doctor Who. There's a TV show called Doctor Who, and they're showing 3 films, unrestored film prints of the Dalek Invasion of Earth, Planet of Decision, The Chase, and Death to the Daleks. And I will be on stage with Mr. James Goss, introducing those, telling you fun facts, things to watch out for, and such like. So, if this podcast comes after that date, then
you missed it.
That will be a pretty pointless waste of 2 minutes. Well done, everyone. I'm sure you'll edit it out, Richard.
Well, I wouldn't be so sure about that. And since it's that time of the year again, making his annual special guest appearance, it's Missing Episodes podcaster and celluloid aficionado, Tim.
Good evening, everyone. Hello.
Hello.
Yeah.
I was disappointed. I was expecting you in your introduction, Richard, to adjust the title of the podcast. So when you do your little rhyme, something old, something borrowed, I thought you were going to end it with something ood. And I expected you to be there. So if you want to re-record that before we go out, just a suggestion, from one podcaster to another, up the ante.
To make
I'm so sorry. I'm in an
something
obnoxious
ood.
mood. There you go.
So go on.
No, hello. How are you doing?
Splendid. I mean, I dream about having a panel of this quality. So it's lovely to see you all.
It's nice to be back. I'm in a wrong environment.
A dream to some and nightmare to others, didn't someone once say?
Gavin, I am definitely going to go to the Riverside / went to the Riverside to see you and James Giles introduce those Daleks.
I'm looking forward to it. / how was it for you?
It was great.
Brilliant.
We're joking about time. It's great. Yeah, good. Rick, can I ask you a question?
You certainly can.
Because I follow you on X.
Yes.
About your Lego. It's amazing. So, if you're setting out to do, say, the Tricolor Cafe from Evil of the Daleks, is it trial and error, or is there an element of design? In either case, it's amazing, and I don't know how you do it, because my abode here is full of Lego, but I have a nervous breakdown whenever I try to do anything off grid, that doesn't follow the instructions precisely. So how do you do it? I want to know.
Well, let's start with, I'm glad you picked the Tricolor Cafe, because the trigger for that was Gav's article in DWM.
Oh, yeah. Amazing.
I'd never given that cafe the second thought. It's in 2 grubby telesnaps.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden in Doctor Who magazine is this bonkers 60s cafe. And there were a number of things appealed to me about it. One was that it was in red, white and blue, and most of my Doctor Who models end up being beige or grey or whatever. And secondly, it was all diagonals, and Lego doesn't necessarily do that well. So it was a challenge of a build.
You could have built it at a 45-degree angle.
I could have done, yes. Gravity then comes into effect, unfortunately, even for Lego.
Gravity.
So you do, well, I anyway build like I did when I was a kid. It's just a big tub of Lego, and it's all trial and error, simply put. And sometimes there's an element of the scene, you can see a Lego piece that's your starting point, and you just build furiously around that.
Yeah.
But with a lot of, particularly 60s and 70s Who, those production teams were just building quick anyway. And so it's quite boxy. That works well with Lego. They reuse stuff, and I disassemble my models. I reuse stuff.
Yeah.
Those kind of wooden panelled walls that are on lots of my sets, they are the same wooden panel wall. I just rip them off. The image of the Fendal corridor becomes the backdrop for the ships in Enlightenment, and they become the in the Village of the Angels, the house that they're barricaded in that. So it's just a lot of reuse of stuff, and that's how I turn from doing one model, which is a reasonably sensible thing for a grown-up to do, and wake up years later having done literally hundreds of Doctor Who scenes. There's a lot of cheating and reuse, and
it's
but
very
fun along the
accomplished,
way.
and it's so nicely photographed, and it's a lot of fun, and it lends itself really well to the subject, I think. Interestingly, there's someone on Twitter who recreates and keeps threatening to recreate episodes using Lego style animation, and I find that really appealing because you sort of know what you're dealing with, and it works. And in an age where everyone's struggling to find, some more successfully than others, the best way to recreate a missing episode, that Lego medium really works.
The interesting thing is there are quite a few people who are sort of specialising in Lego Doctor Who models. I love them all. It's not a competition. It's a fantastic way to share your love of the show. But like you say, there are people who do animations. There are people who computer render their models. They have a very different building style. And I love it when somebody tries the same model that I have. I've seen half a dozen Wotan war machines, and perhaps because they're doing it on computer or they have different brick selections to me, their mind interprets that in a very different way. And it's lovely to see how people's minds work in terms of doing something very similar to what you're doing. So I kind of embrace the dozen people who are playing around with Lego to, as I say, express their love for the show.
Is there, not to make this the Lego podcast, but I'll hand it back to Richard in 45 minutes or so. Is there such a thing as like modelling software with Lego?
Yes, there is. And Lego have provided open source sort of CAD style Lego programs, and that allows you to create things like instructions that you can share with people or monetize if you want to do so. Yeah. The reason why I'm still building like I was 6 years old is this is my release from sitting in a Teams environment all day with work and not wanting to look at a screen, wanting a breakout from that. And so I'm very much an old school Lego builder, but I'm happy to embrace people who are building in different ways, and computer software is one of them.
Brilliant. Well, Gav's very much the same, because when we were preparing for this podcast, Gav sent me some photographs of a Lego model of one of the Whitechapel murder sites. So, I think it lends itself to Doctor Who better, but there you go.
It's so good, that Whitechapel set. It's so good.
Thank you very much, Richard. Thank you for indulging me.
No problem.
Yeah. And I guess just before we move on, the other thing that I've seen recently, Gav, that I thought really enhanced my understanding of what was going on, was on the season 15 Blu-ray set, the Horror of Fang Rock making of those the models of the sets there that you did with Reese, wasn't it?
Anthony Lambo. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he did the bulk of that. I did most of the crew quarters and the crew room, which you pretty much don't see on the Blu-ray, unfortunately. I think it would be nice if once the exclusivity of the Blu-ray has waned a bit, which it probably has by now, I think we should do a nice 3D walkthrough and just stick that on YouTube. Yeah, because there's a lot to see in that 3D environment. And yeah, I like with Andrew Orton's brilliant stuff that he's doing at the moment, I just love seeing those sets laid out in studio as the actors saw them. It gives you a real insight into the technicalities and the difficulties. And one of the things that's really interesting is you don't appreciate how they had to plan the camera moves, not just in terms of blocking the actors in those environments and all the normal things you think of are going to be issues, but the camera moves that you can't have because you start to thread the camera cables into knots. And that was something I never appreciated, is you sometimes look at those studio plans and you think, well, the obvious thing would be to move that camera from there to there. But what you realise is, because it's already gone from A to B to C and created a triangle, it can't go back in a certain direction because then it will overlap and tie it in a knot. And just all of these other little nuances that you don't appreciate. And you see how actors had to get from A to B in a given amount of time. Yeah.
I wouldn't have believed quite how tight a space it was. It doesn't look that small when you see it on the screen, but yeah, it's fascinating.
What really kind of defined this, or my feelings towards this story, was when I went on holiday in the mid-2000s. I don't know when the DVD came out, that would date it. But I went on holiday to Mallorca, and it was a fairly grim place that we stayed at, and the sink was blocked, and I was feeling a bit homesick, and the place stank, and it was all a bit weird. But I had taken the censor rights on DVD, thinking I'll just have something to do. And I watched an episode every morning in Mallorca with my cereal in this otherwise dreadful environment. And it became a very fond rediscovery of the story. I think serialized is the way to view the story. Not necessarily in a smelly, foreign flat.
Serialized literally over breakfast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, very good. I remember been quite intrigued by it when I would have read the original archive feature for it back in Doctor Who Weekly issue 9.
Oh, yes.
Issue 9, as I've just checked. It was a special monster issue, it says. Sensorite Zygons and Lizard Men, and possibly telling me they put the Zygons on the front cover.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember being quite intrigued by it, but I don't recall reading the novelisation. I'm trying to think when I would have first seen this. I must have seen it on a hooky copy at some point in the probably early 90s or so. But then I don't think I really owned it until the DVD came out, which is 2012, I think. So.
Are you just making a liar out of me about my mid-2000s Mallorca story? Thanks for that.
Oh, sorry. VHS? No, VHS was late, wasn't it?
And it wasn't Mallorca.
I touched
It was
a
the
donkey
Wirral
on that holiday.
Still could be the Wirral.
For me, there are many reasons to really like the Sensorites. It rattles along as a six-parter. It neatly breaks itself into those three sequences where it does some horror and suspense. It does some internal politics and world building and a bit of conspiracy. It does that sort of more Yesterday's Enemy type finale with the humans who don't know the war has ended. It's got real opportunities for the Doctor to do something different and really take a lead in an episode and involve himself in the solution. As we say, Susan gets to shine a little bit. There's the context of it in season 1. It's hard to pass on the Sensorites as being anything other than a great story, but at a really critical point in Doctor Who's history, an early history. You wouldn't want to skip this in a pilgrimage of Doctor Who, because I think it's a really important story and an enjoyable story.
Well said.
Yeah. So I mean, I trailed at the start that I didn't have the journey I was expecting. I mean, I'd remembered it as having a strong first episode and then falling away, which was, So I enjoyed the start that you talked about, Rick. You know, the recap. And then I was very impressed by that shot that Tim you'd stuck up on Twitter the other day of the sort of pan out of the control room into the ship. I mean, that's very nice. But then, to be honest, the rest of episodes 1 and 2, it was starting to flag a bit, and I thought, oh golly, if this is the high point, what's the rest of it going to be like? But actually, when they got down to the sense sphere, I suddenly it kicked up for me, and I actually rather enjoyed 4 episodes of the plotting and scheming, and this time round I warmed to it. And the thing I came out of it feeling was, I think we get the Sensorites we deserve, because if you want to see boom mics in shot, if you want to hear fluffed lines, and you want to see dodgy costumes that don't quite work and so on, well, I mean, they're all there, absolutely present and correct. You're quite right, well done. Yeah, absolutely, that's there. But if you're open to watching a nuanced story where the goodies aren't all good and the baddies aren't all bad, and there's good motivation, as we've discussed, for what everyone's doing, then you've got that too. So really, you choose what what you want to be watching. But I think it's it turns out to be quite a strong story.
One trope of Something Who, which has been said often, I'm afraid to say, is that when you go back and watch what was felt to be a filler episode at the time, turns out to be bloody good. And I felt very much like this now, because I wasn't wrapped up in a season arc, and I wasn't that impressed with the Ood, because I'd just seen the end of season 3, and I thought that was the best TV possible. And I did a little Twitter poll before coming on, just to see if my feelings about Planet of the Ood were mirrored. So I just asked, how did you rate Planet of the Ood when you watched it at the time? Top tier, bit of a filler, or a miss. And 107 votes. 61% said a bit of a filler.
Okay.
So if anyone took part in that poll, go back and watch Planet of the Ood, because I think it stands up better when it's not in the midst of all this dynamite Doctor Who that's going on. But I found it really enjoyable this time. I don't have any issues with it at all. I've got plenty to sing about it. I thought Tim McInerney was brilliant.
How do you say his name, Tim?
McInerney.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Why are you asking?
Just wondered.
I always used to think it was McInerney, but
so did I.
Everyone did.
Okay, right.
Did. We all.
What was that about then?
We've all said Tim McInerney for 30 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
and then we got Mandela affected. And somebody changed it into McInerney. And
I watched Blackadder to death. I watched those double VHSs to death in the 80s.
Starring Tim McInerney, yes.
And it was Tim McInerney.
Yeah, fact.
Well, see, what you're saying is that the third N was never in the name. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and then it's got Mandela into it, and now we just look stupid.
Right. And this time we've got something a bit different for you. It's a chat with journalist and author Jonn Elledge, who I've been listening to on the podcast Papercut since it launched last year. So, hello, Jonn, and welcome to Something Who. Something Who. Do you recognise yourself in that introduction?
Yeah, that sounds fairly straightforward. Journalist, author, has opinions for a living. I think we've covered all the major bases, really.
Brilliant. So I mean, I was drawn into the what I might call the Andrew Harrison podcast universe following, I guess, Brexit and stuff like that. And it became clear to me over time that he was a Doctor Who fan, that sort of bits were dropped in there. And
he's hardcore. He used to edit a fanzine called Meglos. That's really going at it, I think.
Yeah. But he then outed you as a Doctor Who fan before you outed yourself by coming to the Riverside Studios last weekend.
I don't know. I mean, there probably was a time I was in some way in, but a few years ago, I watched the entire series in order, like all of it. I went from, I think I started with An Unearthly Child, and I ended with, at that point, Power of the Doctor. I think it was just before Power of the Doctor came on, so that kind of got to be like the finale. But I did that over like 4 years or something, and I was kind of like making notes on each episode to make sure that I didn't stop concentrating during the boring ones. And then I started sending them to a mailing list of my mates, and then like I eventually decided to just stick them up on a blog. So there is actually, you can find on the internet, there is a Substack of my thoughts on every Doctor Who episode there's ever been. So I'm not sure how in the closet I can really claim to be as a fan, to be honest.
Very good. Well, no, I mean, that definitely puts my efforts to shame. I often preface when we're talking about Doctor Who stories on this podcast, I often preface the thing by saying I haven't watched it since the original broadcast, which can range anything from about 40 odd years to 4 or 5 months. So I do admire the dedication that gets you to sit through the whole thing from start to finish.
It did weirdly. I mean, firstly, I did it just at the point where it was becoming possible. Like now, it'd be almost easy. I mean, you'd need time, but because like almost all the excellent stuff is now on iPlayer, you can like find reconstructions on Dailymotion or dig out the audios or whatever. So like just thinking, if I'd been a kid getting into it now, it would have been possible to actually sit down and watch it all in order. In a way, it just wasn't when I was a sort of little teenage nerd in the 90s. But like actually watching it all properly, it did kind of, it weirdly sort of increased my admiration for it, if that makes sense. Like there's more stuff that I could see the value of in context, even if I found it quite boring in isolation. So I've never been like big on horror as a genre. So the Hinchcliffe era, which is something that fans, when I was a kid, particularly used to rave about, just never spoke to me. And I always found that really irritating. Watched in context, I could suddenly see, no, these are really sort of fun, well-made stories that just, okay, they're not perfectly to my taste, but they're a refreshing change from what's come immediately before. And it worked for me. There's only a couple of bits where I got to, and it's just like, oh, shit, it's so bad. And never for long. So, no, actually, I would genuinely recommend it. It does reframe how you see a lot of things, but you do need to spend some time on it.
Yeah. It's funny, that Hinchcliffe Holmes thing, I mean, that was Doctor Who when I was growing up, so I didn't really appreciate the strangeness of it, but I know what you mean. It works in context, but also it does stick out as being quite different in tone, I suppose, from what came before and after.
Yeah, something that happens a lot during the course of the series is like, if you're watching an audio, you suddenly get to a story and you think, hang on, this has just invented a lot of stuff that I think of as like classically Doctor Who, but actually it's never done before. So as you said, we met the other day at Riverside Studios, we're showing the War Machines. That's an amazing example because like it does so many things of like, using cutaways to members of the public or using the media to tell a story, or the Doctor arriving and just being in with the authorities and working with the army. Like all these things are kind of like absolute staples of the series now. Like it does a lot of in the Pertwee era, it does it again in the RTD era, but it's never done them before at that point. So you get to the end of like 3 seasons of William Hartnell, and it does kind of feel like being hit with a bucket of cold water because it's just suddenly like, oh wow, here's modern Doctor Who.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's remarkable in a way, I suppose, that for a program that was being made up a few weeks in advance by a bunch of different people, one after another, who didn't really necessarily know each other, it's remarkable how much of a through line there is, more than perhaps there ought to be.
Yeah, I think it's because it's quite often made by. Well, no, this is more of the modern era, isn't it? From like the late 70s, at least, you occasionally get stuff written by fans, but obviously all the modern stuff has been overseen by fans who are like intimately familiar with what went before. So the references creep in, whether they mean them to or not. But yeah, I think a lot of it is also just there are common concerns tend to sort of sneak into the stories, or like common influences. So you do get like different responses to the same kind of material, I suppose, is probably how to think of it, rather than it's not that people are necessarily like intimately familiar with every other Doctor Who story up to that point, but they're sort of swimming in the same culture. So I think probably that is a big driver as well. Like the Quatermass thing that kind of starts creeping in. It will just be because there hadn't been that many sort of television sci-fi stories at that point, and that will be something that everyone had seen, right? So I think there's probably those kind of external elements affecting a lot of stuff as well.
And how did you get into the series? Because I guess it must have been either at the tail end or where it finished by the time you were coming onto it.
Both, actually. So I got into it in the most stupid way imaginable, which is like, I remember in a hotel room on a little family trip in Buxton when I would have just turned 9, catching like a little bit of Curse of Fenric and thought, oh, that looks good. So I tuned in for the next story, and then they cancelled the series, which was brilliant, obviously. But then a school friend of mine who I've not seen in 25 bloody years now, who I used to go stay with at his family's big house in the country, was into it, and he had lots of novelizations and the tape of Slipback, and like we watched Day of the Daleks and stuff like that. And I think what kind of grabbed me was just the sheer scale of it, just like there was this entire world to explore. In the same way, I think it's one of those things that gets a lot of kids, if they read Lord of the Rings at the right age, just like it's not just a story, it's kind of like a universe of stories and all the maps and the languages and so on. It's kind of like it's quite something you can immerse yourself in. So I got into it that way. But Doctor Who initially for me was very much it was a written thing. It was a thing in the printed word, because of the novelizations were the easiest way of accessing it. And then a couple of years after that, I got very into the New Adventures. So that's kind of to the extent I have a home era, it's the sort of written Seventh Doctor and, Benny and Ros and Chris is kind of that's my period.
Right.
And then I kind of like, I drifted in and out a couple of times, and probably would have in the normal course of events got over it and got a life, except for the fact that at some point in my mid-20s, the show came back and somehow became the biggest thing on television.
Hi, Jess. Back in the Something Who bunker.
Yes, and so soon. But what have you done with Paul?
Oh, you just missed him. I'm sure he'll be back soon.
He wasn't here last time, so either he's avoiding me...
Oh, I'm sure he's not that.
Or that internet conspiracy theory must be true.
Oh? Which one?
You know, Paul is dead.
Never heard of it.
I mean, he was very much alive last time I saw him.
We recorded with him quite recently.
Well, I did my own research, and according to the theory... sorry, let me pull it up on my phone. Second Coming of Christ. Omni rumored true, buried under Ian Levine's base. Okay, here we go. Paul died in an unfortunate incident with a Chumbly soon after recording a podcast. But to spare the public from grief, the surviving Something Who team replaced him with a sound-alike, subsequently misspelled there, subsequently communicating this secretly through the titles of their podcasts.
That's ludicrous.
Totally ridiculous.
I mean, which titles?
Well, may you ask. Episode 89, After Image. Episode 90, Hidden in Plain Sight. The internet thinks it was Paul on these two, but the event happened before they came out.
But they're just titles playing on the episodes we reviewed.
Richard. Episode 91, Necessary Evil. Telling me that, unfortunately, Paul wasn't available for the recording.
Well, he wasn't.
Sure. Episode 93, Royally Duped, hinting to the world that you had a sound-alike. Episode 94, A Shoulder to Cry On, trying to hide your grief.
It wasn't like that at all.
Episode 95, Sensitive Kind, remembering Paul for his sensitivity.
This is crazy. And where would we find a sound-alike?
Come on, everyone knows, even me, that Paul sounds exactly like David Mitchell.
Oh, come on. David Mitchell's a star. He wouldn't come on this.
But Giles was on Only Connect. He probably asked Victoria. Ha!
Don't be daft.
Look, it's a clever theory. I'll give you that. But the problem is, there's no truth in it. Paul's just away for this one. He'll definitely be back next time because he was keen to chat about the Celestial Toy Maker.
Are you sure?
Would we lie to you?
So, you're sure, really?
Yes.
Very well. I'll accept your word as English gentleman. But I know that wasn't really Tim on your last podcast.
So let's move on then to talking about The Chase, a 6-part story written by Terry Nation and directed by Richard Martin. We've got a long way into our discussion and we haven't discussed the music. And Jess, I feel like it's an omission thus far. This is relatively early, I think, in the Dudley Simpson career, I suppose, in Doctor Who.
It is. It's his third story. He has started to become a regular already, which is pretty impressive. Not that many composers got repeat opportunities after Norman Kay did several in the first season, and then we get a bit of Raymond Jones, who did The Romans and the Savages, and we get some repeats of Tristram Cary. That's kind of it. And so Dudley Simpson is starting to become slowly a regular, although apparently he was not Richard Martin's first choice. He wanted to get a composer called Max Harris, whose work I don't really know because I've never seen Doom Watch, I've never seen Porridge. These are later things that he did, where he wrote the title music for those shows. So I don't know what he was doing contemporaneously to this show. But alas, and that could actually be the reason why he was commissioned so quickly, because Crusade is only 2 stories ago. And so most of the time that didn't happen. And so could be the reason why he was at hand or in mind when he was commissioned. But it's a very, very distinctive score. And one thing that I find when we eventually talk about our second story of this diptych of stories here is that it's very piano-based. It's there's a very strong piano element to the score. That's often the driving part of it, either in a melodic sense or an accompaniment sense. But the piano has a lot of center stage music in this, which makes it very distinctive. I've heard people talk about this as a very jazzy score. Now, I take the term jazz more literally. I'm thinking like Ambassadors of Death when we talk about a jazz score. But it's very groovy, 100%. It's very groovy and very rhythmic. And, it's some of the pieces sound like it's written for bass and drums and, a few instruments added on top. So like a rhythm section of a band. But particularly, one thing which ends up being kind of novel, innovative in this story, is that for 3 episodes, there is an opening theme to the story. There's that do-do-do-do-do-do-do. That stuff happens in the beginning of the first 3 episodes, but it doesn't remain for the rest of the time. And that is something that Simpson would actually continue to do where he could. He did it in The Celestial Toymaker. We get that in Ice Warriors and on through until such things didn't happen anymore. But that was a real first opportunity for him to have a kind of unifying theme, if you will, which in one of the suites that I transcribed, I was able to put together some of those cues that use that melodic material from the theme and make about 2.5 minutes of music from it, which was a lot of fun. And it's interesting. It goes right the way through the story. And there's a lot of music in it, and there isn't a lot of repetition at this time. Quite often cues would be reused, sometimes many times. There's actually a lot of music that's just used once. A little unusual here, but that certainly could happen.
I guess there's a lot of scene setting to do because it's switching around from between different scenarios. So obviously we get the pastiche Gershwin in the New York. Yeah. Yes,
there's a lot of styles, right from the off, some of the themes that emerge as sort of stings or as very quick, jolts of music, through to the Empire State Building, all the way to London 1965, which is charming.
Yeah.
And so, interestingly enough, it really shows a breadth of ability from Simpson. There's some really interesting, denser music that he makes in some parts, some really richer harmonies, but also some tunes. And it was easier to write tunes at this time because you were just writing moods, and then the director puts it where they want. But a lot of neat stuff and a lot of percussion. Simpson always loved percussion. It's so evocative, whether it be drums and cymbals or xylophone, vibraphone, marimba. They're all in this. Those mallet percussion things work beautifully.
This time we're looking at 2 stories with a bit of flair. Solar flares, to be exact. Initially, we'll look at 4th Doctor story, The Ark in Space, from Season 12, and later we'll examine 11th Doctor adventure, The Beast Below, from Series 5. And with me to decide whether these stories are indomitable or hiding under the table, we have a great pain. Oh, sorry, I misread that. We have a great panel. Starting with Simon Guerrier, well known for writing works of both fiction and non-fiction and making contributions to the Doctor Who DVD and Blu-ray ranges, and the man who knows more about David Whittaker than anyone else alive. Hello, Simon.
Hello, Richard. It's very exciting to be here.
Also a good liar. I've mentioned on this podcast before that 1973 and The Planet of the Daleks is the earliest Doctor Who I remember, but 1975 is an important year for me in terms of becoming a Doctor Who fan. I was 7 at the time, and I'd always watched Doctor Who with my dad, but he stopped watching it that year because he didn't like Tom Baker. So I would imagine he probably watched Robot because it had the Brigadier in it, and he quite liked that. So Ark in Space might be the first one that I watched on my own.
Wow.
So, yeah, that's pretty significant. Also that year, I got the novel, Doctor Who and the Daleks, the Target book, in May. I had a couple of friends at primary school who were also Doctor Who obsessives, even at the age of 7. And I even wrote my own terrible story featuring the Cybermen that we performed at school. So, yeah, I guess Ark in Space is, comes from an important period in my life.
Wow.
Well, when it comes to terrible stories featuring the Cybermen, I'm not sure whether this was the best or worst one of 1975.
that year is really interesting because, because of bringing season 13 forward.
Yeah.
1975, there's 35 episodes of new Doctor Who broadcast, as well as all the other promotional things that are going on, like Disney Time and the Blackpool Illuminations and whatever else. So Tom Baker being the new, the new Doctor, he's suddenly everywhere. And he's like a permanent fixture in the schedules and stuff. So he goes from being who is that to there's never been anybody else as the Doctor.
Yeah,
really quickly. When I was getting into Doctor Who, so I came to Doctor Who a bit later in the sort of 1980 and was then watching it through to the end of the run. And my older brother and sister were kind of like, it's not as good as it used to be. So we got some videos, and I think Brain and Morbius was the first one we borrowed, we hired, and then Pyramids of Mars, which my dad had said was a good one, which I think because he must have watched the repeat. So we bought that, and then the Ark in Space must have been fairly soon after that. And it's cracking. It's really, it was kind of, I could kind of see what my elder brother and sister were saying, because was it like this all the time? And they assured me it was, which is a lie. But,
yeah.
But yeah, it's a really, it hooks you, isn't it? That's the thing.
Yeah.
Robot was my first ever Doctor Who story, so I'm approaching my 50th year of watching Doctor Who. Ark in Space obviously naturally followed on to that. And I can't help when I watch Ark in Space but think, this was one of the two stories that absolutely reeled me in from the start. Ark in Space just continues to just make me love the show more. It's a great reminder of all the things that at 4 or 5 years old I must have loved about the show and still love about the show now. Just it's a fabulous mix of just entertainment for what it is, but pure nostalgia for what started it all.
Yeah, so I wouldn't have seen it on transmission. I was a bit too young, but I certainly had the book. I think the yellow cover version of the book was one that I got at a fairly early on. Apparently it was published in 1977, so that would have been peak for my junior school book club thing, where you filled in, you had to tick the boxes for what books you wanted on the on the little chit, and then you eagerly awaited the books actually coming into stock. It's marvelous stuff, and I loved it then, and I love it now. And then I guess I would have seen it on VHS probably when they released the omnibus, which was 1989. It's probably the first time I actually saw it for real.
Yeah, I mean, I know I'm famous for having watched a programme once and never come back to it. This Ark in Space is a bit different for me. I've owned the story, I think, in pretty much every format. So yeah, I picked up the Target book when it came out. I had the VHS, probably was the one you talked about in 1989. The DVD, it's on Blu-ray, although of course I watched it on iPlayer because just for convenience sake this time. But I could have seen it in all of its 1080p glory. So it's definitely one I've seen quite a lot.
It was probably the first one I saw twice because it had a summer 75.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So is that what's on the second disc of the special edition DVD? Because I must confess that as I quite often do, I completely forgot that I owned this on Blu-ray and ended up watching the going to my DVD box and hooking it
the
out.
Blu-ray certainly has the 70-minute omnibus.
Yeah, it was on the.
I think it's on the DVD as well.
Yeah. Yes, yeah.
So Simon, as you said, this is the start of Hinchcliffe Holmes, and it's straight out of the starting gate. It's not like they take a long time to work out what they're going to be. It sort of feels like they've worked it out somehow, or alternatively, they stumble on something and they keep going with it.
I think actually no.
Okay.
I think so. They make the Sontaran experiment first,
right?
And they go out on location. And Tom Baker falls over and breaks his collarbone.
Right.
And you go, oh, this is all quite serious. We may have screwed this up. And then they come back into studio. And while all of this is going on, the paperwork on the Blu-ray for season 12 is fascinating because it's very polite, but things are going wrong. And they don't like the scripts they've got. Robert Holmes is credited on The Ark in Space, but he doesn't originate it. He takes over a script by John Lucarotti. He's a very well-respected writer in the industry, let alone on Doctor Who. Yeah. Holmes also takes over the Cyberman story. We don't know the extent to which Sontaran Experiment was rewritten. We can see that Genesis of the Daleks was actually not rewritten a lot. It was kind of polished, but it wasn't structurally redone in the way that the other stories were. So the senses of what the heck is going on, like just seat your pants stuff. But if you listen to a very well produced audio version of the John Lucarotti original, which came out last year and I had a hand in doing, what I find fascinating about that script is I think that script would have been fine. It feels a bit season 11. It's written for an older Doctor. It's written for a more First Doctor-y type character, except there's a bit of the Second Doctor in him as well, because he's quite fun and lively and a bit silly, which is something that Tom Baker really picked up on when we did it. And he was going, this is a different character, and I should play it as a different character. So me and Sam Clemens, the director, had to go, are we going to tell Tom Baker how to play Doctor Who, or are we just going to let him do what he wants? A moral conundrum like having two wires and do you touch them? But I think what you can see is that Hinchcliffe and Holmes could have just done that story as it is, and it would have been fine. It would have been, there's some great stuff in it, like Harry Sullivan doing a walk on the outside of the spaceship and then losing his tether and being lost in space and stuff. Really exciting stuff. But what they do is they go, no, it needs to be better. And they dig in, and this must have been against the wire, against everybody's advice of why are you making life so hard for yourselves. Hinchcliffe is 26, 27? He's fairly young. He's not produced before. And you just go, yeah, we're just going to make this as good as we can. And they must clearly be on the same wavelength about how they're going to do it. The design, costume, all of that is behind them, and they make something amazing. And it just, and as you say, so the sense of it is that it comes out of the gate really well. But with my producer hat on, looking at the paperwork, I'm like, oh my God, what was going on? Just there is a whirlwind behind this thing.
And then the Devil's Chord, clearly a thing, but is it used particularly in much music before this point?
Well, the story that they tell is pretty well accepted as true. Sometimes it's treated as a bit apocryphal, but it seems very likely to be true that it was such a dissonance that it's at one time it was to be avoided. Right. Now, there's also a practical reason for that. It's clearly just kind of very dissonant. Yeah. But nevertheless, it is part of very normal music where that sound is resolved. Like it's a tension that needs to be resolved. Yeah. And if it's resolved beautifully, then you forget about the weirdness of the sound. Yeah. You're happy that it resolved. And so also as the blues developed, the tritone is an integral part of the blues because that's part of the harmonies that's supported and the sounds, the melodies that were created, played with some of those notes that were not quite inside the scale, but, move you in a way that you might not be able to articulate at first. And again, the expansion of the harmonic palette around this time, where suddenly, chords became 4 notes and 5 notes and 6 notes, and dissonance was explored to a strong degree. And part of that is in the tritone. And because it is so potentially dissonant and therefore could be attached to evil or danger, it became, the bread and butter of any composer writing for a film or television production who wants some tension. It's all over everything. Particularly in Doctor Who, you cannot, do without. We were recently talking about the chase. The chase is full of tritones. It's part of the nature, whether it's an actual sound or a melodic shape. It's in all kinds of music, and particularly when used just by itself rather than as part of a harmony.
Yeah,
it has that dissonance, which is very potent. It's not necessarily bad. It's not necessarily good. It's what a composer does with it. But it's a challenging sound, and it can be it can bring up some, emotion of, fear, of at least discomfort.
And I think Maestro, it's nailed in this episode.
Yeah, I feel the same, Rick. I mean, right from the beginning, I was struck by the absolute audacity of the whole thing, of the whole story, of the whole production. And that's why I think Maestro's performance is, pitched right. It's just that's what's needed from there. Especially, I mean, now we live in the post, Joker age, or iterations of the Master, which is so manic that even now I thought it came out fresh and interesting and absolutely riveting to watch them perform like that, to bring such malevolence and yet fun at the same time was really just thrilling, I thought. I absolutely jumped when the piano lid fell, because that is a horror of mine that has fortunately never happened. But it's an absolutely horrible thing to happen to a piano. It's horrific. But if you use the pole right and you put it into that slot, it'll never happen. But I'm always afraid of it. I always think about that. And so to actually see that happen, it was just it put me in the mind of, I can't look away from this. And what an exciting start and interesting. I mean, of course, I'm a musician. I'm going to be interested in this, but to see it done so well, so accurately and interestingly, that it will reach musicians and non-musicians alike, that's what any musician wants from their music, is to reach people. It doesn't matter if you know how it works. It reaches you in a visceral kind of way, in an emotional kind of way. And that's kind of how the start of this story hit me.
Yeah.
It was a good kind of hit, for sure.
The Name of the Doctor, written by Stephen Moffat and directed by Saul Metzstein. It's 18th of May, 2013. So just to get everyone into kind of the mindset. So we've had the Snowmen at Christmas. Season 7's come back, and the Snowmen, I was talking about Yeti in the Underground. Season 7's come back. This is the last episode of the second half of Season 7. And we've had one series of Doctor Who split over 2 years, so everyone's complaining because this is the anniversary year and all we're going to get, they moan, is, 7 episodes, 8 episodes in half a season, plus 2 specials. I mean, these days you'd be dancing up and down about that, but people are moaning because they're expecting 13 episodes in a series, because that was de rigueur at that stage. And Moffat has said there's going to be more Doctor Who than ever before, and people are saying, well, how can this be? 50th anniversary is coming along fast. That's going to be later in the year, on the 23rd of November. And it's also going to be the end of Matt Smith's era at Christmas, and in a few months' time we're going to find out that Peter Capaldi will replace him. So yeah, it's a kind of fevered time, and all the more so because just less than a month after this, Bleeding Cool is going to tell us, those of us who weren't already aware of the Omni rumour, that maybe something interesting might be happening in terms of missing episodes. So here we are, and I guess, I mean, why do I go through all of this? I guess it's because when you watch any Doctor Who from this era, you have to kind of ease yourself into it, I think. Ease yourself back into the puzzle. You have to remind yourself what you know and what you should know and what you shouldn't know yet. Because you just can't really watch any of these stories as a kind of one-off or as a...
No.
there's too many hanging threads on all of them, which is kind of interesting, while you're watching it. But when you come back to visit an individual episode, it does make it quite hard. So it's shot between the 16th of November 2012 and the 30th of November 2012.
Wow.
So, I mean, at least he still has his executive producer mate at this point. Things haven't completely fallen apart while they're filming this.
It's about February, wasn't it? I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, the erasure.
Yeah. Don't you give me no reason.
I mean, the sort of whatever we're calling it, the astral plane, the seance, the conference call. I mean, it is basically modern life now, isn't it? I mean, basically, it feels like every bloody meeting for the last 4 or 5 years that I've had, since the pandemic. I mean, I suppose we did have conference calls in 2012, but they were audio only and they were a bit different.
We did. Yeah, it was that little 3-sided black plastic thing that you put in the middle of a conference table if you were unlucky enough to work in an office.
Yes.
And people would poke it, try and get through to New York or wherever.
Yeah.
Depends how big or Maidstone, depending how big the company you worked for was.
I was hoping that you were going to explain to me, Paul.
Oh, God.
Why a souffle is not a souffle. A souffle is the recipe.
You're hoping I would explain?
Yes, I was. Yeah.
What?
At high hopes.
You're a semantics guy.
It's why I've turned up tonight.
Is it Plato's ideal souffle that they're talking about?
I don't know.
Oh, hello.
Because it's the concept of a souffle. It's the essence of a souffle. It is the ideal nature of a souffle, which can never be equalled in reality by a souffle. Although I have to say, I had a very nice raspberry souffle about 15 years ago in Dorset that I can still taste. It was very good indeed. But yeah, on the whole, I think souffles tend to be disappointing, don't they?
I tried to think back to Asylum of the Daleks to try and remember where the souffle fitted in. All I could think of was the fact there's a build up to the line eggs, stir, minute, and then I wanted to kill something. So I can't really help you. He was a book signing in Folkestone the other night. Some friends and I went to see him. Yeah.
Which book was he signing?
I'm assuming it's the same one I saw him at a book signing out in February, so it's been a very long tour. If he's only got from Faversham to Folkestone in 9 months, he wrote a short story for a collection of short stories on the theme of CERN.
Oh, right.
Okay.
I need to apologise to him, not only for all the things I've said so far on this podcast, but the fact I bought that in February and I haven't read any of it yet. But
we're talking about the large donut in Switzerland, are we?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, a variety of science fiction, horror, and fantasy writers all had a go at it.
Right.
And him, from what I recall.
It's going to be an even longer tour if he's doing it for physical order.
God, imagine it'd be about 50 by the time it gets to York.
Posing thought they spent 500 quid on wigs for this.
Well, I tell you what, they were robbed with Ainley's wig.
There's the kind of facts.
Well, I mean, but he already had a wig.
Well, yeah, yes, yeah.
Do you think that's why they did it? Why they kept putting in disguise
wig on top of a wig,
story, just to tease him, so that he would to force him to wear the wig on top of his other wig, and just to try and break him. If we keep doing this, one day he's going to take this thing off and put this one on in its place, rather than stacking them up like pancakes.
A wig on top of a wig on top of a wig would be the one to go for, wouldn't it?
Oh, you know.
Okay.
It's a wonder they didn't deliberately write write a story with the master meeting Nida just to see what happened.
Brilliant. Hello, I'm Richard, and we're back with Something Who podcast, episode 105, where this time we're looking at Well, this time we're,
What?
where this time we're looking at. Well, I've written it badly.
Oh,
Where
this is abominable.
Yeah.
Oh.
Where this time we're looking at two stories with great intelligence.